Welcome to the KO Show with your hosts Noah Kone and Oliver Maroney.
Welcome to the KO Show. I'm your co-host, Noah Kone.
And I'm Oliver Maroney.
And today we have a fantastic show lined up for you with a special guest, Joel Corry, who is a former NFL and NBA agent and also the current cap analyst for CBS.
Yes, and he discusses a lot of things with us in this interview. Definitely breaks down a lot of what the CBA has to offer in the NBA currently, as well as what it was 20 years ago. Obviously, Joel represented quite a few big-name NBA players in the past, and so he goes through a lot of the details, specifically with Shaquille O'Neal.
That's right, and a lot of what we know and understand the CBA and free agency to be today is directly correlated to what Shaq did in 1996. So a lot of good stuff lined up for you. Coming up next, KO Show. All right, joining us now is Joel Corry, who is a former NFL and NBA agent. He is also the current cap analyst for CBS. Joel, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How you guys doing today?
Doing all right. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
So the first thing we wanted to ask you about is how you got into the sports agent industry. Take us through the process, what it was like, and how'd you get to where you are right now?
Well, when I was in college at Emory University, either my sophomore or junior year, I knew I wanted to be an agent, but didn't really know how to accomplish that. So I thought going to law school might be a good thing. Figured if I went to a school in a major city, I went to UCLA, and also looked at the catalog, see you had a sports law class as well, which UCLA did. I took that class second semester my sophomore year, and that class ended up changing my life. The students in the class had a project. Mine was negotiation of a fictitious baseball player for the Dodgers, and the professor had contacts within the sports industry, so he would get industry people to help out. Sam Fernandez, who was still the Dodgers general counsel, did the negotiation from the team side. Sam and my professor, Steve Darian, thought I did a pretty good job on it. Coincidentally, Steve's wife is an attorney, and one of her former colleagues at a law firm was now working at a sports agency. He called Steve looking for summer help. I got recommended for a summer position where I was told at the very outset it had no prospects of any full-time employment. Being a naive or overconfident 24-year-old, I didn't say it out loud, but I thought, I'll change their mind middle of the summer by working hard. By the end of the summer, they asked me if I wanted to stick around and get paid during my last year of law school. And early that last year, I got an offer to work for them as a full-time student after school, full-time employee after school got out. And that coincided with the year my boss, Leonard Amato, signed Shaquille O'Neal. He had Hakeem Olajuwon and Ronnie Lott as his two biggest clients at the time.
So you went from being you went from case study to prospect to full time in a span of about a year or so?
Yeah, in several months.
Wow.
Yeah, it went from not having a chance to have a full-time job, just summer help. And apparently they liked what I was doing. I was asked to stick around, and it turned into a full-time job. So from within a year, I turned it from nothing into something, which is very unusual. And also having a great time working for someone who signed Shaquille. So that kind of changed the types of things that I would work on. I was working football and basketball because the guy who initially brought me in for the internship, Gary Uberstein, was running the football department. I thought Leonard was going to use Shaquille as a vehicle like David Falk did Michael Jordan to attract other clients, but he decided he wanted to maximize Shaquille and be very selective in terms of basketball players. We recruited Chris Webber unsuccessfully. And so I started gravitating more towards football, even though I was doing a lot of Shaquille stuff as well. Because the marketing stuff was split up among several people who were point persons on various deals. And we started building a football practice where some of our clients that we had started to really develop. Like Jimmy Smith and Keenan McCardell really weren't doing anything early on and turned into Pro Bowlers. We ended up picking up John Randall along the way, signed Willie McGinnis. So after 3-4 years, while still working on Shaquille stuff and the basketball stuff, we split with Leonard. It was the most amicable split you're ever going to have in the business because we took all the football players and he didn't want any ongoing obligation in them, which is highly unusual. And we shared office space for another 3-4 years, and I served as a consultant on Shaquille matters, and Gary still was doing a dual role where he was still the general counsel for Leonard's company, and I was running the day-to-day stuff for our company, just checking in with Gary because he had so much responsibilities still doing Leonard stuff. So I was still consulting for Leonard as well.
Which is pretty interesting.
And we finally went our separate ways in the late 90s where we got our own office space. And I'd still consult for him on an as-needed basis for another couple of years. So it's the most unusual type of split you'll ever see in the industry.
Yeah, you talk about that split, with football and basketball. It's widely understood that marketing duties are kind of shared by one department regardless of the sport the athlete's in, but you all serve kind of dual roles for each other. What did some of those things include, and what did you work on that kind of crossed over into both fields?
Well, one thing I did with the marketing department was did a standard terms and conditions contract, which since we had so much leverage, an unusual amount of leverage for an athlete with endorsement deals, that I'd created a template that was so one-sided for us, and it became a standard term for our contracts. Because in a typical endorsement agreement, there's some sort of morals clause, and typically it reads that the company can terminate if athlete does anything which shocks or offends community standards. And ours, the only way you could terminate was if Shaquille was convicted by a felony. Was convicted of a felony. And that's a very different threshold than a very vague shocks and offends community standards or community morals. So that was one of the interesting things. And then I got to be the point person for Shaquille's Electronic Arts deal. I don't know why Electronic Arts didn't use Shaquille in a conventional manner. They didn't do Michael Jordan in a conventional manner when they were both under contract with them. They had Michael Jordan with some game where he's shooting fire basketballs out of a gun, and the game they did with Shaquille was this karate game with no violence in it, or no blood and guts like Street Fighter and those games called Shaq Fu.
I remember that.
It would have made more sense if they had used those guys in a traditional basketball setting. And they did have an idea that we couldn't agree upon everyone on board in terms of the split between Michael and Shaquille, where it would have been a 2-on-2 like street ball basketball game in the park, and they were doing a deal with the Retired Players Association to get some players from their group to be in the game as well, but it just never came to fruition. But being the point person for the Electronic Arts deal was something that I really, really enjoyed.
Awesome. Can you give us some details into how the deal with Shaquille O'Neal took place and basically how long that took, like time frame wise? Are you looking at 1 year, 2 years? How long were you working with him, his consultants, and then obviously the teams involved?
You mean from when he left Orlando?
Yes, deal? Exactly. Yeah, the extension. Yep.
Well, Shaq signed a 7-year rookie deal where he had an out after 4 years, so he could terminate. And there was a change from the CBA that Shaquille signed to the CBA which was in existence when he terminated the rookie contract. And if the old CBA had still been in existence, he'd have been with Orlando for at least 1 more year. Because under the CBA where he signed the contract, you needed to complete 2 contracts and have 4 years of service to be an unrestricted free agent. Otherwise, you were going to be a restricted free agent. And if Shaquille had been a restricted free agent, the Magic would have just matched any offer, and that would have been had a huge chilling effect on anyone really trying to go out and sign him. So one of the things I was in charge of, and I was very anal about it, was Shaq had to give written notice that he was going to terminate the contract. and it could be someone in our office to do that. And that got assigned to me from my boss, Leonard. So when the first day the period started, I sent the notice to the league that we were opting out, and then being paranoid that they may not have gotten it, I did it again about 2 weeks later. They were like, we got it the first time. But you talk about what would have been a major mistake if somehow that had gotten messed up. So I was making sure that all the I's were dotted and all the T's were crossed, because there have been situations in other sports where options weren't, contracts weren't voided. I remember Dennis Northcutt with the Browns didn't void his contract because he didn't give written notice on time. So I was making sure that wasn't going to happen. But nothing really started until the summer after the summer of '96, the Olympic year. And I remember being on a conference call, more listening in with the Magic. It was the first phone call we had. And if you're going to try to sign your superstar player, you're not going to be critical about whatever shortcomings he may have, because that's not the proper form to do that. And instead of coming out and doing like Miami did with Alonzo Mourning at the time, offered him $105 million over 7 years, because you do a 7-year deal back then is the max. They basically looked at how much cap room anyone else had and came in at a shade over that in terms of a deal. And it was $54 million over 4 years. You got to keep in mind that back then there were no such thing as salary maximums. They didn't come into existence until that lockout after the 97-98 season. So since they had his Larry Bird rights, that meant that they could sign him for whatever they wanted, and there was a cap exception. So the Orlando Magic essentially played a hardball with a guy who was an unrestricted free agent. To me, it was a blueprint for what not to do in terms of signing your once-in-a-lifetime franchise player, because all they had to do was come in with a strong, say, $140 million over 7 years, give Shaq an out, which we did get after 3 years, and front-load the deal, or have some sort of payment schedule that nobody else could compete with. It would have been done, case closed. But they didn't do that. Now, this whole process took about 2.5 weeks to get done, because Jerry West, from day one, from the time Shaq came in the league, had always kept his lines of communication open with Leonard, because Leonard was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's last agent. He was the one who tried to fix the mess that the previous agent had gotten him in financially. So there was already a good working relationship there. So he would always check in with Leonard. It wasn't any tampering, but he would just stay in contact with Leonard, keep the lines of communication open generally. And the Lakers didn't have enough cap room initially to try to sign Shaquille. That's why Vlade Divac was traded. That was to open up cap room for Shaquille. And their first offer wasn't nearly enough.
And that was the Divac trade that ended up bringing Kobe to L.A. Am I right about that?
Exactly. So it was a twofold trade. It was one, they were dumping him, one, to try to free up room for Shaq, and two, they wanted Kobe, so they killed two birds with one stone. The thing is, the Lakers were all in, and every other viable backup plan had signed during this 2.5 weeks where Orlando was dragging their feet and the Lakers were trying to create more room for a satisfactory deal. So if they hadn't signed Shaq, it would have been a disaster, because there wouldn't have been anyone on the market for them to sign as a replacement.
And we've seen that kind of play out in 2012 with Dwight Howard too. But
yeah, exactly. It was kind of same situation, same thing. Yeah. But they ended up renouncing their rights to like 5 or 6 players, and ended up trading several guys to Grizzlies like George Lynch and Anthony Peeler to give us an adequate enough first-year salary so we could have a $120 million deal over 7 years. Now, Orlando would not, even after the Lakers started coming in and they knew the Lakers were in competition, they never gave us the deal to blow them out of the water. It was only after the Lakers had that 120 over 7 offer on the table did they try to match it and give us a better pay structure. And then there was something that happened in the interim which helped push Shaquille to L.A. I don't know if you remember that the 96 Olympic team played exhibitions before the Olympics started.
Yeah.
And in one exhibition, they went to Orlando to play. And the Orlando Sentinel runs a poll in the paper. Is Shaq worth $100 million? The average person is going to say no. So it was overwhelmingly no. So I thought that was an extremely stupid thing to do when he's going to come in town knowing that Shaq was kind of sensitive as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of sent him a signal, or the people in Orlando don't want me either. But the Magic had a whole 2.5 weeks to just blow the Lakers out of the water, and they never did.
So what was Shaq's mentality, during all of this? There's a lot of things swirling around. Everybody's working on the business front, but what
he's
was he
with the
about?
Olympic team, so he's busy for the most part.
Right.
We're keeping him abreast of what's going on, but it's not like he's obsessing over it. He knew it was going to be one place or the other. And we had some, we really thought he was going to stay in Orlando because when the whole thing started, we had some endorsement deals down there, which ended up we had to break off because they were based on that region and in Orlando. So internally, we really thought he was going to be with the Orlando Magic. But to me, they dropped the ball totally on that one.
Yeah, you could say that. Holy cow.
Now, here's the bigger thing about it. Our whole goal was 3 years, then terminate the contract. And the next deal, and right after Shaq signed, within a year, Kevin Garnett, before he became a superstar, gets that 6-year, $126 million extension. Mm-hmm. So I remember as soon as that deal was done, Leonard and I were talking, and he couldn't believe that deal. And I told him when we opt out, the first number in the 7-year offer we make to the Lakers should have a 2 in front of it. And he kind of looked at me like I was crazy. Then Michael Jordan goes on to sign for $30 and $33 million, so he didn't think it was as crazy as time went on. But we weren't able to do that. The lockout killed the ability for teams to re-sign a guy for whatever they wanted under Larry Bird rights, because salary maximums with that new CBA came into effect. So we were no longer able to opt out and be able to have the Lakers pay us whatever we wanted, because we would have been constrained by salary maximums by opting out. So it turned out from Leonard had signed me to figure out whether it was one of my consulting duties makes more sense to opt out or do an extension. And under the CBA rules, you got grandfathered in on your higher salary when you did the extension. So it made more sense to do an $88.3 million extension over 3 years at the appropriate time, as opposed to opting out and signing for a new long-term deal. So a lot of money was left on the table because of the CBA rules making what we wanted to do impossible. But I guess it kind of evened out because the change from one CBA to the next benefited Shaq from his rookie contract, because it made him an unrestricted free agency sooner than he would have been otherwise.
Right, and at that time, you could still negotiate rookie contracts freely. And why did the CBA change? Were owners losing too much money? Were players not getting fair deals? Was it a combination of both? After that lockout,
every time the CBA changes, it's been less favorable to the players. It's because the owners cry poor. I don't know if you remember that the rookie wage scale wasn't in effect when Shaq was a rookie. His rookie deal was $40 million over 7 years, and he opted out after 4. The tipping point was Glenn Big Dog Robinson. He signed like $68 million over 10 years, and that was the deal where in the next CBA they started the rookie wage scale. And then that Kevin Garnett deal was the tipping point for salary maximums. And it was to get player cost under control for the owners. And when I first started, you could go up a maximum of 30% off of the first year's salary is the maximum annual increase. It started getting lowered with each successive CBA. It went to 20%. And now the maximum increase is 7.5% if you have full bird rights and you re-sign for your own team, and now it's 4.5% if you switch teams. So everything has been one-sided for the owners. And I've always thought that a salary cap just ensured the profit for the owners and wasn't necessary, because these are smart businessmen who became rich by doing what was in the best interest of keeping the business afloat and making sound business decisions. At some point in time, owners aren't going to spin themselves into oblivion. They're going to look at a bottom line. So I always thought the salary cap was put in to protect owners unnecessarily from themselves. But the one thing that even if you do everything wrong in terms of running a team, like the McCourts did with the Dodgers, you get a huge windfall when you sell the team, because the McCourts should have totally ruined the franchise value of the Dodgers for the way they were running it. Mm-hmm. But it seems like these teams are almost recession-proof, in that anytime you sell a team, you're going to make a huge windfall in terms of
we've seen it with the Clippers.
Price.
I mean, we've seen it with the Clippers. You know, they hadn't made the playoffs in some years, but you know,
and they're the worst owner imaginable.
They're the
worst
worst owner imaginable.
The child for bad ownership, and that's a $2 million team.
Right. And then next thing you know, it's selling for $1.5 billion, and you know, everybody's looking at the market as something that they can build around, and you're going from there, really. So.
Exactly.
So I got a quick question tailoring onto this. What are good indications as to whether it's wise for a player to bet on himself?
In basketball, it's very wise to bet on yourself, because the risk of injury isn't the same as it is in football. And particularly with this new TV deal kicking in next year, the $24 billion deal over 9 years. The cap this year is at $70 million. It's going to jump to basically $90 million next year. That's the projection. Could be higher than $108 million after that. You're going to see a guy like Harrison Barnes, who turned down $64 million over 4 years. He's going to sign for $20 million a year, or more than that, next year. And Harrison Barnes, don't get me wrong, I'm a North Carolina fan, good player. When you think of $20 million per year player, just in your head, he doesn't fit that bill, but that's going to be the going rate in the NBA for a good player, not star player, not superstar player. And a guy like LeBron, it's going to benefit him to opt out. He's got a $24 million salary next year. The max under the new CBA, or not new CBA, new TV deal with the increase. If he opts out, his max is going to be like in the $29.5 million range. So it's going to make sense for him to opt out and then decide what to do from there. And someone like Kevin Durant, his first-year salary is going to start at $25 million on his new contract.
Yeah, definitely. You just alluded to it, but more or less, what are the similarities and differences between like the NFL and the NBA structure on contracts?
Well, first of all, there's no similarity, because NBA contracts are fully guaranteed.
Yeah.
There has not been a fully guaranteed contract in the NFL, except for under the rookie wage scale. The top 15 picks or so have fully guaranteed contracts. That's a whole different marketplace. You don't see, like, the most guarantees in an NFL contract, and fully guaranteed is Ndamukong Suh. He has a shade under $60 million fully guaranteed at signing.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
That's chump change for the NBA. Kevin Love, $110 million, 5 years fully guaranteed. We're talking apples and oranges. Don't even start on baseball, because I live in Las Vegas, and our favorite baseball son, the National League MVP, Bryce Harper. Can you imagine that deal he signed?
Oh, no.
With Scott Boras as his agent?
Yeah.
Certainly. That could be a $500 million contract. I know that sounds crazy, but if he is just scratching the surface, and this is the tip of the iceberg this past year, and there's more improvement, and that thing waits a year or two, and he builds upon this past year, even if he regresses a little bit and has, say, he's 35 and 100 and hits 315, it's not going to change anything. It's going to be a crazy contract.
Yeah, no, there's no telling what that could really end up being. But yeah, we want to thank you for coming on and answering some of these tough questions about the CBA, where it was 20 years ago and where it is today, and appreciate your insight and perspective on some of the major things you worked on. So thank you again.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thanks very much, Joel. Have a great rest of your day.
All right, you too.
Special thanks to our partners 750 The Game and 102.9 The Game in Portland, home of the Oregon Ducks. Check them out on the web at 750thegame.com. Go to owntheplay.com to see the best thing that's ever happened to daily fantasy sports. Use our promo code KOSHOW to receive special deposit bonuses and specials.
Well, it was very interesting talking with Joel today. Obviously, talked about a ton of different things. I felt like I could have talked to him for 3 or 4 hours. What did you think of it?
I thought it was fantastic. I mean, just, again, to get that perspective of kind of how the current CBAs was shaped and, hearing about how, really every time there's a change in the CBAs because owners feel like they want to get a bigger share of what's going on. That's not rocket science. I think anybody at home could probably hear that and figure it out. But just kind of some of the semantics behind that is really interesting to hear in detail.
Definitely. Yeah. And then obviously for me, at least, what touched on for me was more or less the Shaquille O'Neal, and specifically that he could have been in Orlando for another 7 years, but instead Orlando decides not to match or even come close to an offer for him, and he goes to the Lakers, and then the Lakers obviously had to deal Divac to get Kobe Bryant. So you're thinking about two major moves that the Lakers did back when Jim Buss was around, and give credit to him for making the cap room available to get obviously a Shaquille to go there, and then secondly to get Kobe Bryant for essentially an older,
a player that had seen his best days.
Yeah, exactly.
by that point, for sure. I mean, yeah, it was a heck of a move that really set up the Lakers dynasty. And I imagine that they knew they could be good in getting the best player, or the best post player at the time. I forgot Michael Jordan was still in the NBA in '96, but the best player in the post they could get available, and then the young talent of Kobe Bryant. I don't know if they saw getting 3 championships, but
no,
it definitely happened. And what happened in '96 set that whole thing up. And you look at what happened then and what the current structure of the CBA is now and what it's anticipated to be in 2017.
Yeah.
And the players, for the first time in a long time, probably have an opportunity to control more of their destiny and get a bigger market share of some of the revenues in the NBA.
Yeah, then basically until that Shaquille O'Neal time frame, because obviously Shaquille could really do whatever he wanted. He was an unrestricted free agent. And I found it interesting that they could sign him for whatever they really wanted to. I mean, he could sign 200. I mean, when Joel was talking about, they were expecting 200. The offers to be in the 200s for a guy in the NBA is just outrageous. Even now today, you think of 125 million as pretty much the cap on what people can sign for these days at 5 years. But really, in that day and age, it was more or less you sign him for whatever you can sign him for.
That's right. I mean, and to think then you could sign a player that got a 30% increase on their salary a year, and now it's 7.5%.
Yeah.
I mean, a 30% increase. I mean, I imagine the players are probably going to fight to get closer to that number than 7.5 in this next negotiation period. And hopefully we don't have a lockout or anything like that. But it is exciting to think about, the NBA's numbers kind of rivaling what MLB players get, and LeBron James maybe getting the first $200 million guaranteed contract in basketball.
Yeah, and the one other thing I'd like to add is more or less that, you look at the CBA as it was 15, 20 years ago, and I think it's more smaller market team-oriented, if that makes sense. I mean, really, you're looking at the smaller market teams being able to match and get way above whatever the player's old contract was so that they can stay. In the instance of like LaMarcus Aldridge, he'd probably end up staying in Portland if he got an extra 30%, whereas he was only getting 7.5% more in Portland than he was, in San Antonio. So it made him want to leave more, and that's where you get a little bit in unfamiliar territory in a lot of people's minds. But I see that as a huge impact on these smaller market teams.
Absolutely, a little bit more parity across the board, and gives them a chance to compete with some of the Los Angeleses and I guess Miamis and New Yorks and things like that.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff from Mr. Corry. I'm Noah Kone. Thanks so much for tuning in.
And thank you very much. My name's Oliver Maroney. Have a great rest of your day.